I didn't go to parties and have fun at nightclubs as much as I wanted to. I was always conscious of loud noise. And so a lot of my formative years were spent protecting my hearing rather than living my life. And particularly as I, was a young gay man trying to go out and have fun at nightclubs and go and meet people and just go and be out and about, it was really hard because I was constantly waking up the next morning with my tinnitus, my ears ringing, and then I'd, go through a shame spiral and a guilt spiral about shouldn't have done that because, you might go deaf. Until one day in 2009, I actually woke up, I think it was 2 days after my birthday or on my birthday. I can't remember exactly the day, but I woke up and I'd lost my hearing in my right ear as well.
Okay, well, I'm here with a rather lovely chap called Tim SNELL, who is also part of the SOMA community, a SOMA instructor like myself. He, interestingly though, has carved a career path that touches on both the spiritual, the esoteric, as well as the corporate. He's managed to get both working at the same time, and Tim will probably go further into detail about how he's been able to do this and exactly what it is that he does and in what space that he does it. But Tim also has, I think, and I hope, a very interesting healing story to tell. And that's what this series of episodes is all about. It's about speaking to people that have figured out and discovered ways of healing their body, their mind, through natural methods. So what I'll do now, without further ado, is hand you over to Tim. Tim, if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll just let it flow.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me here to have this discussion with you. So what do I do? And I always find this one of those questions about how do I really describe myself? Because I do, as you say, stand between two worlds of the corporate world and the spiritual world. And what I do right now is I'm supporting a tech startup as their head of performance. So that's part of my week. I spend some time doing some corporate leadership coaching, and I also have a small practice of life coaching. And then what sits alongside all of that is the work around breath work, which you and I are both familiar with. So I do run a number of breathwork sessions throughout the week. And I, at times, teach workshops on energy healing and energy activations. So I have a fairly busy schedule of lots of different things, but ultimately all of it is based around the same theme of human development and the ability to bring people to a better level of performance, particularly in a corporate construct. That's really important for getting people to be more productive, more aligned. How do we get the team to perform better? But then when we look at it from a personal dimension, it's about what are the goals and objectives that you have personally. And that could be around self-healing, or it could be, I want to fix something in my life, or it could be, I want to do some breath work to improve my health. But so it's all different ways of looking at, human development and self-improvement.
I love it. I've myself obviously been in the corporate space more than I have any other part of my career. My career only very recently in the last 3 years has changed tack. So I'm very familiar with kind of performance appraisals and their very nature, of which much of it I don't necessarily agree with, and I'm sure you don't either. And quite often they don't really touch the real essence of the human that sat in front of there, because that human is quite often putting their corporate mask on, and therefore you lose really the essence of what's going on. So I'm guessing when you're able to tap into the other stuff outside that you've managed to cleverly knit together with your corporate sphere, it's that quite often opens up a few doors, I guess, or at least opens up or removes the layers of that human being, and to get a better understanding of how they can improve their performance, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I think this is it's relatively new for me because I didn't leave 3 years ago. I only left at the end of last year from my corporate job. So it feels like it wasn't that long ago. But the reason why I left was the exact reason that you're talking about, is I felt that everybody who I was working with, or the people around me, were really in that masked state. And part of my mission for the last couple of years has been to speak at leadership conferences, or speaker conferences on leadership, and to talk about how can you align the individual with the objectives of the organization and just get below the skin, so that you can create this dynamic where you're not only accepting that people come to work for whatever purpose it is, but they also have their own goals and their own hopes and dreams. And how can you get an understanding of what that is to help them meet the organizational objectives, but then also to recognize that there's going to be another pathway for them. And if they're in my team, I always felt it was my role to look after both the professional, but also the personal development, so that they weren't in conflict as they often can feel like they are.
I'd say your tech startup is very fortunate to have you, because coming from, I've very much had a sales background prior to this. And quite often, if you were being assessed from a performance perspective, it would be done from the perspective of, okay, how can we get you to make more money? Surely you will need to make more money or want to make more money. What are the things that you want to acquire? You know, what are the material needs that you know? So it was only ever done from that perspective, making the assumption that somebody's doing that job purely and solely to increase their monthly income, rather than looking at any other aspects of improving their performance by making the job a little bit more enjoyable.
Yeah. And I can relate to that because I spent 20 years working in sales teams. And so it's how do you align the goals, as we call them. I call them dreams with a deadline. So what's the organizational dream for the team? And then what are your individual dreams? And how do we keep you engaged so that you can meet the needs internally, but then also allow us to help you develop the skills that you want for that longer term dream? And what I found was when you got to know people at that level, suddenly there was this, almost like a relax, the shoulders dropped. There were real conversations. There was an understanding between me as a leader and my team members, as people who worked with me, to say, okay, so if we know that that's going to happen and we know that that's what we're planning for, it actually makes the whole working relationship a lot easier. And also means that we have an understanding of what we need to do to get things done internally, recognizing that externally there's a whole lot of other things going on as well. And I think where we see this more now is that people are working in their home environments rather than being in a corporate office. In their home environments, they're able to pursue multiple interests without somebody peering over their shoulders. Whereas a lot of that was kept undercover and people were doing it anyway. And so what I tried to do was to bring it to the surface and say, so what is it that you're working on? How can we help you get to that goal in 5 years? Because I always took the pragmatic view that people will leave the organization at one point or another. So while they're working for me, how can I get, as much value as well as adding as much value for the next step?
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Because as you say, I mean, especially now, say in my parents' generation, you would accept your job and be grateful knowing that you've got a job for life, and you'd happily go through the, you would potentially move around, I guess, if you had to, but there was a very different psychology. Whereas now, because of people's assumptions that they should therefore seek not only the next rung in the ladder, but they should go for something that's linked to their passion. They, all these kind of needs and shoulds, these kind of odd descriptives that we associate with because we keep watching stupid things on YouTube or Instagram that tell us that other people have this amazing life. And so therefore, quite often you take on a job, don't you, where in the back of your mind, you're doing the job and you think, I quite like it, but really I want this. And so your mind is always taken away from this grass is always greener mentality. And so you're not going to be totally 100% zoned into the job, job at hand, because your mind is off elsewhere. So this is brilliant. I love it.
But what I also found was when people were talking about what their dreams were, it was really interesting because I would say, tell me, what is this secret dream that you have? And you would find out, it's like, okay, that's really interesting. So you're doing this job. Can you see how this job relates to that place over there? And usually the first answer was no. It's like, well, let's just delve into this a little bit because you're not doing this for no reason. I always think that your soul, your spirits brought you here because this is the stepping stone onto something else. And what we'd often find is that the skills that they were developing in the role, although they may have seemed completely divorced from that new reality, there was often at least a core element of the skill set that would be fundamental to getting to that dream. It's like, so can you see the relationship now? And I always found that really exciting because then I was able to say, okay, so if that's the dream, what do you need to do here to make that real?
Absolutely.
And that actually made my work more exciting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love it. I think it's a really good question now is to get a feel now for, as a percentage, how much of your, let's call it esoteric stuff, do you throw in to your performance related role?
Oh
Is it a
man,
50-50 thing of combining, or
no, I think it's one of those things that's more spontaneous. And I
mm,
think because I've learned so many different ways of looking at, different frameworks or different situations, sometimes something will just arise and I won't know, was that more esoteric or did I read that in a performance-based book or where did it come from? And so I'm finding that more so now the percentage would be increasing because people are a little bit more open. People are a little bit more open to exploring. And also people, I don't want to use the word desperate, but people are desperate for help at the moment. So in different frameworks, maybe not in the corporate space, but certainly in the life and leadership coaching, people are in front of you because they want help. And they're not so concerned about where it comes from, but they just want to know, can you help me? And they're willing to try new things. And so I'm finding that I'm bringing in not so much esoteric, I wouldn't call it esoteric, but I'm using concepts that people may have at one stage of thought were esoteric. People used to think that yoga was a bit more esoteric before it became mainstream. I trained as a yoga teacher, and now it just seems to be yoga's everywhere, the same way that breath work is now pretty much everywhere. So I might use more concepts around breath, but I'm also able to link a lot of what we used to think of as esoteric into science now as well, as science is starting to prove concepts of consciousness and quantum physics, and that's becoming more accepted.
Isn't that interesting? I don't know whether you do put posts out on LinkedIn. I do, and I'm probably going to do more. But as I do, some of the stuff that I had assumed wrongly that my former clients, owners of businesses, would have considered a bit woo-woo, are quite often responding to these posts. And it taught me something. I suppose it taught me that the word is out, that much of the stuff that you and I know is out there, and it's becoming commonplace, and it's part of our language that people are quite happy to talk about without sort of holding back. And I think you're right. I think you made a really valid point there, that there's a lot of people seeking help. I mean, I did a post recently about working from home and actually the detrimental effects of working from home, especially from physiological perspective of just sitting down too long. I mean, as we know, if anybody's watching this, SOMA Breath have put out a Chrome extension. It's free, called Chair Guru. It's a brilliant, simple thing. It just prompts you every hour to do something from your chair. It's not a substitute for getting off your backside, going for a walk in the fresh air, but it is actually a really good exercise that you can do that takes you a couple of minutes. Where do we go from here? Perhaps could I ask you, you've got a story to tell as far as the healing is concerned. And the beauty actually of this is that I know very little about what you're about to tell me. So this will come just as much of a surprise as anybody watching this program. So let's just delve in. Tell me more about what it is that you had and what you've used in order to heal it.
I've probably got three things, actually, come to think of
it
as you were speaking that. Yeah, I'm collecting them. But the main one, David, was the story that when I was 4 years old, I discovered that I was deaf in my left ear. So, and I say discovered because nobody really knows if I was deaf before that or whether that's just when it was found. Doctors definitively don't know a lot about the ear, as I've discovered over the last 3 decades. You hear a lot about it, but actually when you go and see ENT surgeons and you ask them really detailed questions about how did this happen, they're like, well, we don't still know enough about that because it's such a small organ. But what happened was I found out that I had what they call nerve deafness. They think it may have been because I had the mumps at the same time, which apparently was common back in the 80s, that was, what happened to people. And so I was given this label that you are deaf in your left ear and you need to sit on this side of the classroom and you need to walk on this side of people down the street so that you can hear them and, all this kind of stuff. So I was always being positioned at a certain place or being told I had to do certain things, but it also meant that I didn't go to parties and have fun at nightclubs as much as I wanted to. I was always conscious of loud noise. And so a lot of my formative years were spent protecting my hearing rather than living my life. And particularly as I, was a young gay man trying to go out and have fun at nightclubs and go and meet people and just go and be out and about, it was really hard because I was constantly waking up the next morning with my tinnitus, my ears ringing, and then I'd, go through a shame spiral and a guilt spiral about
Really?
shouldn't have done that because, you might go deaf. Until one day in 2009, I actually woke up. I think it was 2 days after my birthday or on my birthday. I can't remember exactly the day, but I woke up and I'd lost my hearing in my right ear as well.
Oh, wow.
So if you imagine that you've got hearing impairment in one ear, and then you wake up with, and your worst fear is I could lose all of my hearing. And so that actually happened to the degree of I'd lost 2/3 of my hearing in my right ear, and I'm completely deaf in my left ear at that
Wow.
stage. And so went off to the ENTs and they said, you should feel really grateful that you can still hear just a little bit, although you can't really hear a lot. And, I can just imagine it's soul destroying in that moment of just like, what? And I didn't have any answers. They had no answers for what they called sudden sensorineural hearing loss. It's a bit of a mouthful. And essentially about 3 months later, that hearing eventually came back, but it also coincided with the fact that I was being headhunted to move to the Middle East. And so I moved to Dubai. And I lost my hearing again in my right ear 3 times. So, and I had no answers for it. It just came, the same rigmarole to the ENTs. I had MRIs, I had ultrasounds, I had all sorts of scans, and nobody could give me an answer as to why this was happening. Until eventually, I decided to delve into it a little bit more. So after the first time it happened in Dubai, I thought I really need to get to the bottom of this. And so I started to really delve into a lot more of the spiritual work, a lot more of what we call the esotericism, and trying to understand what was happening to me and why this was happening to me, but also get an understanding of what was going on. And that took me to Peru in 2012, and I worked with Mother Ayahuasca in the Amazon. It was my first ever experience, and I was away, I didn't know much about it. I just saw a retreat. I thought I'd go along. It sounded I could go to Machu Picchu. It sounds amazing. And there was this thing called ayahuasca, which I didn't know a lot about. And I thought, well, you can get your answers. That's what I was told. You could get your answers. So I sat in that ceremony, and the answer that I was given at the appointed time was, after all of the stuff was going on, but essentially I was told, you stop listening. It was the only answer. I just thought, that's a bit useless.
That's brilliant. And so
that was the answer.
How does the answer come to you, and at what point does it come to you?
So if anybody, you've probably seen on Netflix, there's been a lot of stuff around ayahuasca ceremonies, but it's that period of time when I say all the drama's happened. It's after you've done the purging and everything's happened, and you're in a place of stillness. So a lot of the activity has started to calm down in your body, and I was just in that still place, and it was just like a booming voice that had come from nowhere. It had come from the back of my head somewhere. I don't know where it had come from. It just felt like it'd come booming in saying, you stop listening. And I was like, oh, but this is the same ceremony where I remember looking around the room and I could actually see what I would call the matrix. So the letters and the numbers were formed all around the walls around the ceremony space. And I would have thought that I was going a bit crazy, having hallucinations, but actually everybody else who was sat in that ceremony had seen it as well from their own vantage point. So they were sitting opposite me or over here and over there. They also, the next day we shared our experience. So did you see the letters and the numbers? I'm like, yeah, I saw that. It's like, okay, so, there's a lot of unexplained things that happened in that ceremony. But for me, the key point was the answer that I stopped listening. And so it took me many years to understand what that actually meant.
I was going to ask you actually whether that did resonate straight away, and obviously it didn't.
It didn't. I was like, I didn't get this. But I then spent 2012, I then spent years. I traveled to Peru again. I've been to Egypt to sit there for galactic alignments. I've, you name it, I've probably tried all these different healing modalities, Reiki, energy healing. I've been to clairvoyance. I've spoken to people, and the only assurance I really had for myself, the only trust I had, was that I was given that information and I was told that my hearing would start to return, but that my heart was closed and that I wasn't really living a purposeful life. So it's been a long unfolding and a lot of exploration, shall we say, of all these different things. And if you ask me, well, what is it, what is the thing that helped me the most? I couldn't put my finger on which one of those modalities it was. But what I can tell you is that having moved to London in 2015, I had a hearing test in 2019 because I hadn't had one for 5 years because I hadn't lost my hearing while I've been here. So I haven't had a need. And I thought, I've noticed that when I was fully deaf on this side, because obviously I'm not now, but when I couldn't feel anything on this side of my head. So I could tap my fingers here and it could be like tapping on wood because I couldn't feel it. I couldn't hear it. So you'll know that if you tap on your head, you can hear that internally on your skull. I couldn't hear anything on this side. I also couldn't hear or have any sensations around my ears either. And then I noticed over time that I could actually, if I put my finger in my ear, I could actually hear that. And I could actually feel something scratching around. And so I thought I'd go and have a hearing test. And it showed that the hearing in my left ear had actually improved by 10 to 20% from a baseline that hadn't changed for 30 years.
Wow.
And I'd been having those tests from when I was a kid, had the same tests in Dubai. And because the problem was in my right ear, they were still always testing the left ear, but it had not changed. And then I had another test last week, 2 weeks ago, and it had gone up again. They didn't test all of the frequencies this time, but the 3 frequencies that they did test had gone up again by another 10 to 20%. And so this is where I say, there's been this massive change in the feeling on this side, but there's also been a fundamental shift in the ability to hear, even though people would still call me, I'm still moderate to profoundly deaf.
Right. Very, very interesting. So in other words, the not listening, we assume, is not listening to your calling.
Not listening to my purpose, not listening to really what was what I was called to do. I was working in corporate jobs that were really exciting at the time. I was working in the Middle East. I had a really exciting job, but it was highly stressful. And the not listening was when I was most stressed in that job was when my hearing would go.
Right.
There was a shutdown mechanism for my body to say, you're not listening to me. So I'm going to shut you down. And that's when I would have the right ear would completely collapse.
Very, very interesting. You're on the right path now, though, it seems.
Yes, because that's the opening. So, again, going back and having gone back to Peru, having gone back to see healers, people who look at your energy system, what they've said is that your heart is wide open, when I knew that for years it hadn't been, and that it had been this very closed, protected space. And people say, when are you going to open that? When are you going to start sharing your gifts? I was like, well, I'm doing it, aren't I?
Yeah. That is, I love that. I really do. And part of it just, it makes me think about that whole, when people get that intuition, that gut, the message from the gut, that most people often ignore, and I suppose part of that is what's going on there, isn't it? At some point you had these messages that you weren't at the point in your life to listen to them or know that they were there. And
there's also it's the not listening was really, and I kept, I remember it, but I also remember that when I started to listen, things got better. So when I had the opportunity to step out of my corporate job when I lived in the Middle East, and I did step out of my role, I didn't get sick again after that. Because the other message I got when I went to do yoga teacher training was from an Ayurvedic doctor who said, do you realize that your adrenal glands have at some point collapsed in terms of their functioning? Wow. And what were you doing 2 years ago? And it was 2 years ago that I'd left that stressful job, that really stressful job. And so I started to able to piece together the puzzle from so many different places, whether they were spiritual or Ayurvedic doctor or whatever it was. I was then able to say, okay, so now I'm actually starting to listen to my body. I'm starting to listen to my own intuition, and therefore my health, and I had to take care of my health at that point, because I said, well, how long have I got? And he goes, you got another 1 year before they're recovered. So I don't recommend you go back and do any sort of stressful work for the next 12 months.
Isn't it amazing how, and I think people are beginning to realize this, especially now, how stress and anxiety has so much of more of a powerful effect on the body than we ever imagined. It really can cause a number of things. And obviously it's not the root cause of your hearing. At some point during childhood, at birth, whatever, something's happened that's caused this. but it would be very interesting to see how much further it does heal. I mean, you know, there's books about people that have, in fact, there are lots of stories of people healing their eyesight, aren't there? You know,
Hmm.
through improving their eyesight through doing exercises. So, and as we know, there's lots of stories about healing the body. We know that we're much more capable of healing what's going on inside than
I
we ever
think it's the
thought.
belief. I think it's also the belief because
Yes.
what triggered my interest in this was going to the retreat my first ever retreat in Bali in 2011. And this wasn't the purpose of it, but it came up that I was told a story about a young boy who was able to grow back his collarbone. I've since researched and I've done a lot more research about people's ability to heal their bodies. And it was this belief that if this person can do this, if that's possible, then what's possible for me? And so I've carried, forward that the belief in the possibility of.
Very Joe Dispenza like, really, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
I know that not everybody necessarily likes Joe Dispenza. I happen to like him, but it's that kind of psychology, isn't it? Of the energy that created life is the same energy you can tap in to heal your body. So, like it. Tell me more then about your daily practices that you think might well be part reason for the improvements
I think,
that you've made.
well, actually, I think it's more a fundamental shift into doing the things that really excite me. And
Mm,
part of my daily practices, I mean, I've had lots of them over the years, but I was doing yoga. I recently started to do more pranayama type practices, but this had started to happen over a much longer period of time. This wasn't an overnight thing where I suddenly woke up and discovered that, oh, my hearing started to come back. It
mm,
was a gradual shifting, but I think it's a gradual shifting as you come into alignment.
mm,
And I was working with a craniosacral therapist for a number of years on an ad hoc basis. It wasn't like a weekly thing. But part of that was, again, peeling back the layers of resistance. So diving deep into the energy body to find the blocks wherever they are and to
mm.
peel back those layers of self-resistance to what was going on. So repressed anger, repressed emotions, repressed energy. And it's been that gradual shifting and unpeeling. And so part of that is about meditation, doing your own energetic healing work, doing your own emotional clearing work, so that you come to a much more, as I say, this aligned state of being aligned to the truth of your existence rather than resisting it. So accepting, also part of me is accepting that I do this wisdom work and I can also do this corporate work, and I don't have to choose a label.
Yeah, brilliant. How much of what you're now telling me is accepted by those in your corporate sphere?
Some of it would be by some of the people,
Mm,
but not, I would say not a lot of it. The other thing that sort of links to this for me is what I teach is what I call diamond light activations and diamond light numerology, which essentially says that all of us have chakras and they have all the colors of the rainbow. Depending upon your birthday, you'll get certain energy centers or chakras that are blocked. For me, mine is number 7, which is confusion. And I do a very head-based job. I've been doing a head-based job for 20 years.
mm,
And so it's really natural that I would choose that work, given that that's my energy center that's blocked.
mm.
So my inspiration, my connection to spirit, my intuition, and that is on the same sort of line almost, if you think about it, as the ear and the hearing. So what I've
Mm.
noticed is that as I come more into alignment with the work that is, for me, creative, that is much more aligned to intuition, then it's no wonder that started to clear. So I
That
look
is
at it
interesting.
from an energy block as well, because that's where, for me, based on what I teach, that's where my energy block is.
I
But
would
back to your question, I
imagine,
don't think a lot of people would accept that.
no, well, I do, and I think actually that's probably where mine is blocked. Um, I'm studying at the moment something called flow code, and they talk a lot about transient hyperfrontality, where if you look at the likes of when you're doing exercise or when you're in a flow state, it's this part of the brain that shuts down to allow for the other creative bits of the brain to work. And you can only ever get to that state by taking on these various practices. Sometimes it is just exercise, sometimes it's meditation. So that's, I have to say, one of the areas that I'm exploring more and more now in order to get in that creative state, because quite often I get frustrated when I'm supposed to be doing something creative and all I feel is just this really strong barrier to doing the stuff that I know I need to do or want to do.
Part of it for me has been about trying to solve everything with my head and with my mind. So not trusting on feelings, not trusting on intuition, not paying attention to the gut feeling. And I've had to retrain myself a lot to pay attention to those small intuitions, because I know that now I know the times I don't pay attention to them. And it could be small things like I used to walk out of the office and think, I should really check I should really check what's going on with the trains. Simple thing. And you think, well, why would I do that? And it's the same every day. And then those days that I didn't check were the days that the train system was a complete mess and it'd take me 2 hours to get home. But it's that intuition of, I need to do this. And when I don't pay attention to it, I know it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But it's those small gut feeling things that I have no explanation for. Or it could be that I should do this thing and I don't pay attention to it. And then that's when it turns out to be a mess. So it's coming back into this, well, what does all that mean? And that's really hard to accept. And it's hard to fall into that trusting state to just say, well, just go with the flow, go with the intuition, go with what your gut's telling you. Because I've been too focused on solving it from here. Yeah,
well, probably like most people. Isn't that what we've been taught to do, especially throughout school? And it's funny, isn't it? I think only if this is where I think I don't consider myself lucky, other than from the perspective of having a bang to the head that's allowed me to consider another path, to explore all of this stuff. And I certainly would not want to be a yogi in India living in a cave in order to do this exploration. I've gotten too used to this way of life. And actually, I'm sure at least in part, my family would probably miss me and I would miss them. But there is something lovely about choosing a path where you explore all of these ideas, some which resonate, some work, some don't. But what you are doing is at the very least enabling your mind and body to get to a state where you use much more of its potential than you ever would had you stayed in this space to try and solve everything and figure stuff out.
Yeah. I think it's really important for also, for men in particular, to pay more attention to their emotions, because I think for me as well, there was a lot of repressed emotion, particularly growing up as a young gay man, coming out quite young, having to go through bullying at school, all of that kind of stuff really shuts you down. And I find that it doesn't matter, sexuality, take that out of the equation. There's a lot of people who've been bullied. There's a lot of people who've had a lot of early childhood trauma, and it is essentially trapped in the body. And so a lot of these practices have helped me to get into much more in tune with my body. So yoga helps you to get right into your body, helps you to expand your flexibility. It helps you to really get to know the edges of your body through all the different yogic practices. Breath work helps you to get right down deep and to release, trapped energy, as you well know. Sometimes we just end up spontaneously crying. We don't have a story for it. We just know that that's a nice release, whatever it was. See you later. And all of these different things help people in different ways. Not all of them resonated, as you said, and not everybody will resonate with all of them. But the one thing that's tied all of them together, whether that's yoga, whether that's breath work, whether that's all the healing work, even the energy healing, there's always been an element of the breath. So even whether it's Reiki, whether it's shamanic energy healing, whatever healing work I've ever been taught, it was always the breath. And so that's why I've become very passionate about using breath work as one of the tools, whether that's in a corporate environment or whether that's in a more spiritual environment with different clients. And sometimes I bring it together.
Well, it's one of few things that are almost an instant state changer, in the sense that you can do a very quick exercise, breath exercise, that will take you from that very tired middle of the afternoon state to back to being energized again in order to carry on with the task. So this is why I agree with you. I mean, it's such a brilliant thing to bring into the corporate space, because so many people do have that mid-afternoon slump. Quite often it's because they've eaten too many carbs. They're not looking at what they're eating properly. But still, if they had these tools, or they had somebody that could guide them through these simple techniques in order to change their state, then at the very least, from a horrible perspective of looking at efficiencies and things like that in a corporate space, it's such a brilliant thing to bring in, isn't it?
Yeah.
you mentioned there, so did you come out then at school age?
Yes. Yeah. So it was in my second final year at
Very
school.
brave. Because I know you're younger than me. I have to assume that you're a fair bit younger than me. So therefore, coming out when I was at school, so sort of,
Would have been,
late
for me, it would have been
70s, it would have been slightly harder, but still would have
2000.
been fairly tough for you.
Yeah, I think it was, for me, it was 2005 in Australia. They didn't get gay marriage until a couple of years ago. So people think of
Wow.
Australia as being quite a progressive place. I can tell you that for, that wasn't the case when I was coming
Really?
out. I had a great circle of friends and supporters. But then I also had a lot of hassle as well,
Mm.
because it wasn't, the outer suburbs of Melbourne is pretty much like the outer suburbs of most places. It's not always a supportive place for young people.
Right. And is the association with being male still more macho oriented, or was then?
I think it's shifting. I'm now part of a discussion group for a men's summit that we're pulling together, and there's a lot of people from Australia. And so I'm able to tap back into the conversations that are being had there around masculinity and around mature and immature masculinity and how that's showing up in Australia. But I think there's a big shift as well, just globally, around how we view masculinity as an archetype and how men relate to each other. And we're seeing that shift. We're seeing it in the younger generations. But that wasn't the case back in, when I was going to school. It wasn't so macho. It just wasn't, nobody wanted to be friends with a gay person.
Yeah.
It was just, you're different. And actually, I think I had it easier than the people who were sort of geeks and nerds, because I think they got picked on more than I did. I used to look at what was going on for them and think, gosh, I'm lucky.
Wow.
And I think for them, it's just different. You were just different.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Perhaps then, if I could just move on, I think you mentioned that there was possibly another one or
Yeah.
two.
So there was two other things. I'm just reaching over.
Let's hear those.
So the other one was, you would know through SOMA Breath that we talk about, sometimes we talk about use of Colostrum, and Niraj talks about Colostrum as a tool that he's used in SOMA Fit. And so I started using it because I used to have really bad IBS after dairy products. So I could have ice cream at a restaurant and I'd be, 10 minutes later, I'd blow up like a balloon.
Wow.
Because I was so bloated and uncomfortable. And I used Colostrum for about, maybe a month. And now I can have cheese and I can have ice cream.
Wow, that quick.
I can actually, literally, like, amazing. So that was another natural healing that has helped me significantly, because any dairy products, I couldn't eat that. I loved cheese and I couldn't eat it, but
as do I.
Yeah. And so that really helped. And the other one is in James Nestor's book on breath, which we talked about before this call. He talks about nose breathing and mouth breathing. And even though I am a SOMA Breath instructor, I didn't realize that I was an unconscious mouth breather.
Yeah, I learned that about a year or so ago. Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not a mouth breather. That's not possible. And then I realized that actually I am. And I also keep my partner awake with snoring. And it's been really embarrassing for me if I go to retreats or if I have to share a room with somebody. I do whatever it takes to not have to share with somebody, because I don't want to deal with the embarrassment of that. And so what I did was I started taping my mouth, which James Nestor suggests. And now I can sleep a whole night without the tape and I don't snore.
Amazing. I am a mouth taper still. What I found actually is that I started doing it from the oxygen advantage a year and a half ago, and I wrongly assumed that I'd cured myself of mouth breathing at night. And then it was a bout of hay fever that switched it back. So it's something to be mindful of. I don't know.
I still keep the tape here.
You do, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I've gotten so used to it, as has my wife. Quite often, we've got my 5-year-old in the middle of the bed as well, sleeping with us sometimes. So everybody's used to me. The noise of the tape going and then a rip and then a slap.
Well, I actually put the whole thing over the whole, because I.
You do the hermetic seal.
Yeah, because I found that wasn't enough. But actually, my partner had been away for a month. And had come back and didn't know that I'd been doing this, and had woken up in the middle of the night and thought that maybe I passed away because there was no noise. And so I do still use it, but yeah, it's been incredibly, because the nights that I forget to put it on or I just can't be bothered, I actually don't snore anymore. So those three things have been natural, I guess you could call them, but they've been ways to deal with health challenges. And I also notice I feel better. I sleep better. My sleep efficiency, according to my Hoop, is about 95%. So I'm getting a full night's sleep and I'm rested.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, I noticed through taping my mouth that my dreams are that much more vivid, longer. I'm able to remember them in the morning. I know that I have had a calmer sleep. And it all makes sense, doesn't it? When you start engaging this more in all activities, there's a huge positive impact on your body. I see my son breathing, and he, I think because of dairy or wheat, is suffering. And so most nights he definitely has sleep apnea. And I want to put some tape over his mouth, but he's only 5, so I probably shouldn't be doing that just yet. But that's certainly, when he's a little bit older, something I will be concentrating on. And when you talk about dairy as well, I grew up eating cheese every day. I mean, I was obsessed with it. Every time I'd come back from school, open the cupboard, cheese on biscuits, and I would gorge myself. It was no wonder I went through a severe acne phase in my later teens. And it didn't even click till much later life that I had an issue with dairy. But one of the things I found, and I'm going to try colostrum, by the way, I still haven't tried it, but I'm going to give that a go. So it's very much improved. I can have it now in small doses. And I think what's helped me has been fasting, which I do every day. And I think that's probably enabled my body to figure out ways of digesting it, or at least enabling some of the good bacteria to work more efficiently. I'm not too sure, but either way, it seems to have made a difference. But I am certainly going to try colostrum. And in fact, I've got a friend who might well watch this, a Kiwi friend, that I might suggest he try some colostrum, because I think, as we know, improving what goes on in your gut can have a marked difference and impact on all areas of the body, can't it?
Absolutely. I didn't know it's one of these things. I'd give it a try. You probably picked up, I'll try anything. So I thought I'll give this a go, see what happens, because I also just noticed that, I was eating well, but I just didn't feel, I was bloated all the time. I just generally uncomfortable. I thought, this is ridiculous. This has got to stop. So I thought I'd follow SOMA Fit's instructions on colostrum. And I was surprised, and actually I didn't even realize that it had gone away until I went on holidays earlier this year, actually about a month ago, and I was eating cheese and dairy, and I thought, oh wow, there's no bloating. So it was one of those things that had happened without me realizing it, without even thinking about it. And I thought, okay, I can trace that back to that month of every morning, every evening, taking my colostrum.
Brilliant. And I know that you're successfully juggling a number of different businesses as well as corporate roles, but do you have a picture in your mind about where this is all leading to?
So I wanted to have a portfolio of different things, because I was really bored in my corporate work. I just didn't find that, although I had a great team and I loved the people that were immediately around me, I didn't find that I enjoyed that structure as much. So my vision was to create a space where I could stand in between the worlds, whether that was doing consulting. Originally it was going to be more around the consulting, and then still do my healing work. Because part of what I believe, and part of what I have as a vision, is that people like me, people in corporations, need the help of people like me, whether that's just doing breath work, or whether it's helping people to, through coaching, to be more aligned to purpose. Because I see a massive shift when people are aligned to purpose as well. But they need people like me to provide that support. But I don't need to be inside necessarily to do that. So my bigger vision was, how can I create a space for me to play? And so this year with COVID, all of my corporate work more or less disappeared for a while. And that's how I ended up in SOMA Breath, because I'd started doing that in December last year. Right. And so I really ramped up my SOMA Breath practice during lockdown. And so I've been able then to gradually add back in more of the corporate work as lockdowns eased, as clients have come back on stream. So my vision really is to stand between the worlds and not necessarily have to be in one place or another, because I don't see myself, as you say, living in a cave in India, or necessarily standing wholly in the shamanic natural healing space or wellness space. But I also don't see myself being back in a full, how would you put it, corporate architecture for a very long period of time. So I see myself as somehow in between and serving. And this is, I think, the biggest shift for me is taking it from being, what can I get out of this as a job, to how can I serve? Who can I serve, and how can I serve with the skills that I have? And so that juggling is around, I'm very clear. I have certain days where I do this. I have a certain day where I do that. And then I have the SOMA Breath, which fits on the outsides of those other two things.
Do you have a website or any other thing that you would like to mention?
So my website is timsnell.co. Has information about me, about the different things that I do, particularly around SOMA, around the energy work that I do, energy healing, and the workshops that I run throughout the year. And that's really, I think, my hub at the moment. I'm shifting a little bit away from social media because I'm finding myself a little bit fit, as you probably appreciate, there's a lot of noise, and I'm preferring just to be in my smaller community and to operate that from my website.
Good for you. I will drop, obviously, a link below in the description if anybody wants to reach out. I can't believe I've just used that term, reach out. If anybody would like to talk to Tim about the stuff that he does, then there'll be a link below. So we're going to end the call now, but hold on, Tim, because I've got a couple of questions for you, if I may, if you have time. Thank you. Anyway, that was a really good
thank
story.
you.
I love how you present yourself. There is a very calming nature to you, which is either something that's always been a part of you, or it's got something to do with the journey that you've gone on over the last few years. But it's lovely to see. I love what you're doing, and I love the fact that you have been able to combine all of your interests. And
it's only a recent thing. It's really only a recent thing.
Well, it doesn't matter. I still love it.
Thank you. I'm still like trying to balance it out.
It's an enviable thing, because I think, there's one thing finding a passion and doing that thing. That's one thing. But then also to be able to combine something that's in your history, your corporate career in your history, and not wave goodbye to it totally. Because as you said as well earlier on in the call, there's often a reason why we end up in these jobs. Even if these are jobs that you look back and think, I shouldn't have done them, there's a very good reason why you ended up in them. Even if they weren't the right one, there was something about that job that probably was right for you at that time. Thank you, in which case. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope we get to chat again. Just as a passing comment, this is the first time I've mentioned it actually on a video, and I'm probably going to mention it without embarrassment on a few other videos, that the channel now is advert free. I have a Buy Me a Coffee platform, so if anybody has appreciated the stuff that I'm putting out there and they want to help further grow the channel or offer suggestions, there is a link below for Buy Me a Coffee, if you know what that is. Very similar to Patreon. Anyway, thank you for watching. Evolution of Dave signing off. Thank you.